The murder of Senator Marcus Flavius was just the beginning, a single bloody thread pulling at the tapestry of Rome's greatest lie. Because the truth is, the horrors lurking beneath the Forum were not the work of a few madmen. They were official policy. This was an empire that had industrialized cruelty, creating a bureaucracy of bloodshed that operated with the same cold efficiency as its legions. While the public story of the senator's death spread, the real machinery of power was already in motion. This was a system that required supply chains, logistics, and meticulous record-keeping. A cache of administrative documents discovered beneath the ruins of Ostia, Rome's port city, reveals the chilling reality. This was not a shadowy cult. It was a government program. The documents include detailed inventories, not of grain or pottery, but of human beings. Children were categorized with clinical terminology, listed as specimens of premium quality or subjects suitable for prolonged experimentation. Shipping manifests track their movement across the empire with the same bureaucratic precision used for military supplies. They were cargo, routed to fulfill quotas set by provincial governors. The demand for these innocent lives came from multiple, horrifying sources. The gladiatorial schools sought young boys for specialized, brutal entertainment. Private collectors paid fortunes for children from exotic, conquered regions. But the largest consumer was the state itself, for rituals that fused religious mysticism with absolute power. This network was sophisticated. It used specialized transport vessels designed to move large numbers of children while maintaining their value. It employed physicians to assess their health and predict their suitability for different purposes. This was a dark mirror of Rome's famed logistical prowess, a nightmare version of its genius for organization. The purpose was always power. The rituals in the chambers beneath San Clemente, the renewal ceremonies mentioned in military dispatches, they were all part of a belief system that claimed the suffering of the innocent, the children of defeated enemies, could grant dominion over life and death itself. The empire was not just conquering lands, it was attempting to conquer the very forces of nature through the most abominable means imaginable. The blood on the Forum stones had been scrubbed away, the senator forgotten, but in the darkness below, the system he had discovered continued to operate, its paperwork in order, its shipments on schedule. It was a machine that consumed innocence to fuel its power, and its most terrifying feature was not its cruelty, but its impeccable, cold, Roman efficiency. The horrors concealed beneath Rome's marble surface were not confined to dark rituals. They infiltrated the very concept of medicine, transforming healing into a form of sanctioned butchery. This was the second secret: the Roman elite's widespread, systematic consumption of human flesh and blood, not out of desperation, but as a calculated pursuit of power, health, and longevity. This practice, which medical texts euphemistically called imperial diuretics, traced its origins to the conquest of Egypt. Roman physicians absorbed and corrupted ancient beliefs that consuming human organs could transfer the strength or essence of the deceased. What emerged was a medicalized form of cannibalism, a market for human bodies that operated in plain sight, disguised as sophisticated pharmacy. The most respected authority of the age, Galen, physician to Emperor Marcus Aurelius, gave these practices a veneer of legitimacy. In his writings on the natural faculties, he vaguely references preparations made from the vital essence of conquered enemies, rendered into elixirs for those who would absorb their strength. He describes an imperial elixir specifically prepared from the hearts of young warriors killed in the arena, ground with spices and consumed by emperors before battle. This was not the magic of back-alley sorcerers. It was state-sponsored science. The practice reached its grotesque peak under Emperor Commodus. Historical accounts describe his obsession with consuming the flesh of gladiators he had personally slain, believing it would grant him their prowess. But secret records from the imperial household, preserved in fragments, reveal a far more systematic operation. An inventory from 188 AD lists the contents of the palace's restricted medical wing with chilling precision. 12 vials of heart's essence drawn from defeated nobles, preserved in wine from Chios. 6 measures of brain matter from Germanic chieftains, dried and powdered with cinnamon. The liver of a Nubian princess, aged in honey for 7 years. Each entry notes the spiritual and physical qualities the organ was believed to impart. This wasn't limited to the imperial court. In the ash-preserved ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists found evidence that wealthy Romans frequented upscale medical facilities where human blood was consumed as a cure for epilepsy and ground human bone was prescribed for impotence. Carbonized remains show clear evidence of the systematic butchering of human corpses, primarily slaves and prisoners. their deaths lost in the high casualty rate of urban Roman life. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was the belief in sympathetic consumption, the idea that eating a specific organ of one's enemy would grant the consumer their knowledge or abilities. Letters between provincial governors describe executing captured druidic priests and scholars, not just to eliminate threats, but to harvest their brains in ceremonies designed to absorb their wisdom. The conquest of Gaul became, in part, a hunt for cognitive plunder. But as the Roman appetite for such physical and spiritual consumption grew, it began to merge with something even darker, something less about absorbing power and more about summoning it from the void. The pursuit of invincibility through medicine was about to lead them deeper into the darkness, into the arms of cults that promised dominion over death itself. As the Roman elite's thirst for transcendence through physical consumption reached its limits, they descended into a deeper, more psychological darkness. This was the realm of forbidden cults that moved beyond mere cannibalism into the systematic shattering of the human mind, all in a desperate grasp for power that defied death itself. This is the third secret, the rise of state-tolerated religions that practiced ritualized torture as a sacrament. The cult of Nox Eterna, the eternal night, emerged from the ashes of traditional faith after the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius. When the old gods seemed powerless, a desperate aristocracy turned to deities that promised control through darkness, not light. This was not the structured worship of Mithras or Isis, but an underground movement dedicated to what its followers called the Great Inversion, a deliberate overturning of the natural order. Their practices, documented on bronze tablets found beneath the Pantheon, were meticulously cruel. Initiates were subjected to weeks of sensory deprivation in absolute darkness, fed bread and water laced with potent mixtures of ergot fungus and opium. The goal was to break their grip on reality, to make them pliable vessels for the cult's horrors. By the time they were led into the ceremonial chambers, many could no longer distinguish nightmare from waking life. What followed was the cult's central ritual, the slow, methodical torture of captured enemies. But this was not mere sadism, it was alchemy. The cult believed that consuming the blood and fluids of a suffering victim during their final moments would grant participants a form of immortality, a power over the very threshold of life and death. They sought to achieve sacred madness, a state they believed opened gates to entities that existed beyond the Roman pantheon. Imperial involvement reached its zenith under Emperor Caracalla. While historians note his obsession with magic, coded letters from his reign reveal a more specific horror. Before military campaigns, Caracalla would retreat to chambers beneath the Palatine Hill with captured enemy nobles and their families. The historian Cassius Dio wrote of these prisoners being returned to their cells changed in ways that made death seem merciful, their minds shattered by experiences that left them whispering prayers to entities whose names cannot be rendered in human speech. The cult had discovered that a mind broken in a specific way could become a bridge to perceived supernatural forces. The archaeological proof emerged during renovations of the Colosseum in the 1932, where workers found chambers containing not simple shackles, but sophisticated restraining devices designed for prolonged, precise control over a subject's body and senses. Residue analysis revealed traces of both preservatives and psychoactive drugs. This was no longer random cruelty. It was experimental research. The Romans were industrializing the process of breaking the human spirit, not just for intimidation, but because they believed a broken mind could see further than a sane one. They were creating instruments of flesh and bone, and in doing so, they were laying the groundwork for their most coldly calculated horror yet, a system that would not just use adults, but would build itself upon the most vulnerable of all. The sophisticated machinery of Roman power required a constant, gruesome fuel, the innocence of youth. The rituals and research into the human psyche created an insatiable demand that could only be met by a fourth, and perhaps most cold-blooded secret, an industrial-scale child trafficking network administered not by criminals, but by the same bureaucrats who manage grain supplies and tax collection. This was not the incidental slavery of conquest. This was a highly specialized trade that targeted children with specific characteristics, age, physical attributes, tribal origin, to meet the precise requirements of the state. A cache of administrative documents discovered beneath the ruins of Ostia laid bare the chilling bureaucracy of suffering. There were official quotas, detailed inventories classifying children as Galatian specimens or donation subjects, and shipping manifests tracking their movement across the empire with the dispassionate efficiency of any other commodity. The demand was diverse and horrifying. Gladiatorial schools sought young boys for specialized, brutal performances. Private collectors paid a fortune for exotic children from the edges of the empire, But the largest consumer was the state itself, for the mystery cults that required pure victims for their rites, and for a new, terrifying initiative under Emperor Hadrian. Despite his legacy as a cultured builder, Hadrian personally authorized the establishment of developmental facilities in remote regions. Disguised as schools or philosophical academies, these were in fact live-in laboratories. Here, children from conquered territories were subjected to systematic programs of deprivation, indoctrination, and physical modification. The goal was coldly scientific: to study the limits of human adaptation and to create conditioned beings who could serve specific imperial functions. Some were trained from infancy to be hyper-specialized servants, anticipating every desire of their masters. Others were psychologically broken and rebuilt to serve as perfect, pliable participants in religious ceremonies. Archaeological excavations at a complex near Trier revealed the stark reality: holding chambers for hundreds of children, complete with medical examination rooms and cells designed for psychological conditioning. The remains found at such sites tell a silent story of systematic malnutrition, deliberate injury, and medical interventions aimed at altering normal human development. These children were not merely slaves, they were raw material for the Empire's most ambitious and monstrous projects, their very humanity systematically erased in the name of research and control. The most successful subjects, those who survived this calculated breaking process, were transformed into living tools. But the ultimate purpose of this vast, cold-hearted system was yet to be revealed. It was all in service of the final, most disturbing secret of all: a state-sponsored research program dedicated not just to breaking the body, but to dismantling and remaking the human soul itself. The final, and most profound, secret of the Roman machine was its deliberate, scientific pursuit to unravel the very fabric of human consciousness through pain. This was not the chaotic cruelty of the arena, but a state-sponsored research program into the limits of the mind, an attempt to create living oracles from broken souls. It began during the Jewish Wars, when Roman physicians realized traditional torture failed against zealots whose faith allowed them to transcend physical pain. Their solution was to develop graduated extremity protocols. A medical treatise from the era describes methods for maintaining subjects in states of extreme suffering for weeks, using precise anatomical knowledge to prevent death or unconsciousness. They learned to control blood flow, layer different types of pain, and employ temperature and chemicals to overwhelm every psychological defense. The goal was to push consciousness past its breaking point into what they called the clarity beyond the veil. Under Emperor Domitian, this research expanded. A coded letter reveals his desire to create oracles of pain, individuals maintained in controlled, perpetual states of agony, whose shattered minds might perceive truths hidden from the sane. This program reached its peak under Hadrian, who established dedicated facilities where the empire's finest physicians and philosophers worked to systematically induce altered states that promised superhuman capabilities. The most successful subjects, their bodies sustained by intricate systems, were said to exhibit telepathic abilities, precognition, and contact with otherworldly entities. These human instruments served the state, providing military intelligence gathered through inexplicable means and insights into the morale of distant provinces. Rome had learned to weaponize the human soul. The key that locked all these horrors into place was discovered in 1969, hidden in the Vatican Library, the Palatine Codex. This was not a fragment or a letter, but a complete administrative manual from Hadrian's reign. It revealed the terrifying truth: the child trafficking, the medicinal cannibalism, the cults, and the torture research were not isolated atrocities. They were interconnected components of a single, integrated system for maintaining imperial power. The Codex treated human lives with cold, bureaucratic calculus, discussing cost-benefit analyses of suffering and the optimal return on investment for each horrific practice. There was no moral conflict in its pages, only the same engineering precision used to build aqueducts, now applied to the systematic exploitation of human life. The official version of Roman history, of law and architecture, was built upon this hidden foundation of organized, institutionalized cruelty. The morning sun that rose over the forum where Senator Flavius died shines on a world that still venerates Rome's achievements. The blood has long been scrubbed away, but the eagles still watch from their marble perches, their stone eyes reflecting the empire's ultimate secret, that civilization and barbarism are not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance. Rome did not fall because the barbarians were stronger. It fell because, in its relentless pursuit of power, it had already consumed its own soul. History often hides the stories of those who suffered in the darkness, to fuel the light of empires. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of the Roman era, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps keep these forgotten truths alive.